This morning, an inquiry into policing has been taking place in Cannock Chase. Members of the Home Affairs Select Committee have gathered at the Town Hall to discuss proposed cuts to policing. A potential 2,500 jobs here in the West Midlands, and out of those, 1,000 will be police officers. Yesterday on the Politics Show here in the West Midlands, Chris Sims, the Chief Constable, spoke of the potential of widening police forces.
There's a debate still within the service about whether the 43-force structure is appropriate. Many of us would love to move to bigger forces that were more resilient and more efficient. Unfortunately, that's a debate that government doesn't want to have at the moment.
That was the Chief Constable of West Midlands Police, Chris Sims, speaking yesterday. Well, on the line now from Cannock Chase is local MP Aidan Burley. Hello, Aidan.
Hi there.
Aidan, how did the meeting go this morning?
It was a very interesting and constructive debate with some very, very kind of knowledgeable speakers and contributions from the audience. We had half a dozen Chief Constables there. We had Ed Balls, the Shadow Home Secretary, Nick Herbert, the Minister for Policing, and lots of police officers and members of police authorities. So it was a very constructive, well-informed debate about how to do more with less and about the changes that are going to be happening to the landscape of policing in this country.
And were those 2,500 cuts confirmed?
Was Chris Sims you're referring to?
Yes.
He didn't mention those specifically, but I was on the Politics Show with him yesterday, and though that was the figure, I think the point to realise that on those numbers is that is not necessarily police officers on the front line. A lot of those officers will be in the middle office, for doing compliance, recording statistics for the Home Office and other agencies. So that is not 2,000 officers being lost from the streets of Birmingham and the West Midlands.
No, but we do understand it's about 1,000.
A lot of people will be doing form filling and paperwork as well.
We do understand it's about 1,000 police. We do understand it's about 1,000 police officers as well as 1,500 support staff. But anyway, whatever the figures are, do you, Aidan, as an MP looking into this, do you think the police can actually continue to provide a strong service despite losing 2,500 people? Whatever they're doing, how is it possible?
Well, it's not just me that thinks that. The Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, which was also represented here in Cannock this morning by Sir Dennis O'Connor, who's their head, has identified 12% or 1 billion of savings that the police can make nationally without affecting the front line. And he spoke about some of the bureaucracy that the police still suffer under, having to repeatedly key in the same information into often 17 different forms.
That does sound mad, doesn't it?
And so on. And there is clear that there is a lot that can be done within the service to free up officer time, which they can then spend on the beat, rather than just talking about the numbers, the numbers game.
If the cuts go ahead, Aidan, when will they come into play?
Well, what we said is it's a 20% reduction over 4 years. So they'll come into play from the next financial year. And I think it's front-loaded. The first year is 6%. So they're going to happen fairly soon. But the reality is that times are tough. We've got to deal with this deficit. The police have got to play their part, as other government departments have got to. So, you can either go around saying that all cuts in the public sector are bad, or we can have a kind of grown-up debate about where the cuts should fall and how to take costs out of the police service and other public services without affecting the front line that all of your listeners rely on.
Aidan, of course, apart from the actual spending review proposals, there are other aspects of policing discussed this morning as well. Was there any mention of the merging of forces, as Chris Sims spoke about earlier?
There was some discussion of mergers, and the Policing Minister, Nick Herbert, made it clear that that is not something that is on the government's agenda. He made the point that he didn't even think it would get through a vote of the House of Commons because there is so little support for it amongst MPs and amongst the public generally. And of course, people will remember Charles Clarke, when he was Home Secretary, tried this and it failed and didn't work out. But I think there's a different path, which is rather than merging the 43 forces, actually you can look into merging a lot of the back office functions and having far more shared procurement, so that forces are getting better economies of scale by buying their uniforms together and their helicopters together and their IT. So you can have mergers of the back office and in things like procurement without having to move to a regional police force rather than the traditional 43.
That all sounds encouraging. Just one last question, Aidan, just in a nutshell really. Our listeners will hear cuts, they'll hear mergers, they'll hear changes, and they'll worry about crime on their doorsteps, they'll worry about what's going to happen to them, are there going to be enough coppers around? What do you say to that, Aidan?
Well, I mean, I understand people's concerns, and as I say, you know, we're having to deal with this massive deficit we've been left with, and all parts of the public sector are going to have to play their part. But I think your listeners will probably be as surprised as I was when I learned that only 11% of an average police officer's time is spent on the beat, proactively reducing crime. 89% of their other time is spent tied up in the stations, in filling in forms, in not being visible and accessible to the public. So I think the public can be reassured that the government is doing everything it can to reduce this form filling and this bureaucracy that the officers suffer under. We're just getting rid of the stop and account form this week in Parliament, so they no longer have to fill in a form every time they stop and talk to someone. And actually we need to be focusing on, you know, getting the obstacles out of the way so the police can do the job they do. And if we can do that, then your listeners can be reassured that they're not going to see a diminution in service from the police force.
Well, thanks for putting your view on that, Aidan. I mean, that was a shocking statistic. 11% of time spent on solving crime and 89% spent on form filling. An absolutely shocking statistic there. So thanks for bringing some clarity to that. And that's Aidan Burley, Cannock Chase MP. Thanks for joining BBC WM today.